very interesting evening at the Oxford Union last June, and as we walked into the chamber, Neil and Kathy Gindel and myself were told, I'm really sorry, it's great you've turned up for this debate, but it's going to be an absolute walkover. The students are of course going to support the motion, this House would end the war on drugs. And it was a very interesting debate which, as Julian says, did end in a 60-59 defeat for his team. And if you haven't seen that debate, the extracts from that debate, I do urge you to go online and have a little look. Just Google it. Yes, first of all, I'd like to thank Keith and the committee. I'd especially like to thank Keith for the sensitivity and the role that he played when Amy Winehouse died. Last time I saw him, it was when I took Mitch Winehouse along to meet Keith, and we were met with a very gracious reception and really listened to, and I really value his input. Okay, I'm going to start with a little quiz, and we've heard a lot of talk about evidence and the importance of evidence in this area. So I just want to gather a little bit of evidence from you guys who are willing to take part in this. Just raise your hand, please. Who's had caffeine today? Thank you. Who enjoys drinking alcohol within safe limits? Okay. Who enjoys binging and getting drunk? Okay. Excellent. Thank you for your honesty. Who had a drink this morning? Okay, interesting. I'm not sure I believe that based on the number in the room, but okay. Who's ever used an illegal drug? Thank you, quite a lot of you. Who gambles excessively? Okay. Who has sex outside of your relationship? Okay. Who in the room is LGBT? Lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, if you don't know what that means. Okay, who is clinically obese and feels out of control around their eating? Okay, the reason I'm asking you this is because this area, you know, I got appointed to the ACMD and I'm speaking as an independent person today, but when I was appointed to the ACMD in 2011, one thing that struck me very quickly when I had access to the evidence base and the latest research that was coming in was just how many holes there are in the evidence base and how imperfect the evidence base is in this area. Because as you just experienced personally, it's actually difficult answering these kind of personal questions. I mean, obviously this isn't an ideal environment. Maybe if you came to see me one-to-one in my clinic, you'd feel a little bit more comfortable, to be completely honest. But talking about one's personal life is very difficult. And when we look at the evidence base, it's certainly skewed in all sorts of directions. Big pharmaceutical companies have paid for a lot of the evidence, and you know, that area has a lot of good evidence. But people like myself, those people who are in recovery, our evidence is really lacking. You know, the wonderful work that happens in the 12-step fellowships and the other mutual aid groups, that evidence doesn't really get collected very well. And what actually creates recovery doesn't really make it often before the ACMD and other people who are interested in the evidence base. The other thing, of course, is that we live in a very fast-moving environment. Everything is changing week by week, day by day, because of what's happening with new substances, as we've heard. And if you think that's not important, today, the people who come and see somebody like me are polydrug users on the whole. You know, I'm very glad that Professor Nutt highlighted the issue of alcohol, because alcohol is absolutely integral to understanding the issues that present to somebody like myself. And alcohol is often a drug that is taken in combination with other substances. You know, when you start looking at polydrug use and trying to look at the evidence around polydrug use, it gets incredibly complicated. The evidence base lacks diversity. The evidence base, you know, doesn't reflect the diversity of our populations and our communities. The evidence base doesn't really reflect gender. I'm just raising these as questions and problems that we have. Okay. So health. There's been a big debate about what addiction is and what recovery is. You know, we live in a society that has the wonderful National Health Service. You know, if we have physical, medical conditions, the NHS is fantastic, of course. But the NHS comes from a very particular perspective on addiction. It tends to be a very medical model. It tends to be very physically based, physical dependency, and that really isn't the whole story around addiction. You know, addiction can take many forms. It can take addiction to substances that we know about. It can also be people can be addicted to behaviours, gambling you all know about. Some people are addicted to shopping, some people are addicted to sex. These are controversial things to say, but it's really important because if you only treat one of the symptoms, you're not treating the whole illness. And you know, we have an enormous problem with obesity. You know, from my perspective, obesity often can be a food addiction issue. So So there's been a big battle about what is recovery. You know, is recovery abstinence? Is recovery, you know, can recovery be somebody who's on a maintenance script and you know, improving their life? Who gets the right to define what recovery is? Well, certainly the 2010 drug strategy, reducing demand, restricting supply, building recovery, you know, did a very good job in terms of redefining what recovery is. And as we heard from David, we had a move towards abstinence-based recovery, which I applaud. However, what we didn't also have was a move towards investment. You know, it's all very well encouraging people to come off opiates, but we didn't have an investment in the modalities which I believe are necessary to support people in ongoing recovery. We didn't have an investment in trauma therapy. We didn't have an investment in long-term treatment. You know, payment by results is very much about encouraging people to do their treatment in a discreet way and then kick them out of the system so we can, you know, collect our paycheck. Actually, anybody who's got this illness knows that relapse is part of the process. If you've tried to give up cigarettes, you'll know that often you'll give up a number of times before you finally find recovery from that substance, and it's the same with all addictions. There's a failure to diagnose amongst teens. You know, we don't have a teen rehab in this country currently. When I tell my American colleagues, my partner who's in the audience is from Los Angeles, and when I go and speak to professionals in the States and say we don't have a teen rehab in the UK to treat those teens who are cannabis dependent, or those teens who have, you know, a binge alcoholism pattern of, or you know, are self-harming, those colleagues in the States are absolutely shocked when I say that. You know, I stand before you as somebody who started drinking at 12, and I have brain damage because of my teenage binge drinking. This is really serious, you know. We put our young people into care homes. Often our young people end up either in the criminal justice system or in care homes, where, as we've seen in the news in the last year, a lot of those young people are, you know, able to be preyed upon by paedophiles and are very at risk. What we don't do is we don't diagnose those young people and put them into treatment. You know, I definitely agree with the focus on the need to treat, you know, not criminalise young people. Criminalising young people who have an addiction is pointless and just adds to the pain and the trauma. We do need to put those young people in treatment, and treatment actually costs less in the long run if we add up the budget. Thank you. Okay, moving on to social harm. Globalisation. Sorry, there is a globalisation juggernaut. Sorry, start again. There is a global legalisation juggernaut currently going around the world, which is being funded by George Soros and supported by other major capitalists, people who are going to cash in. If we actually look at the reality, you know, do we really have a failing system? Well, let's look at the statistics in the UK. If we look at the smoking, drinking and drug use among young people in England 2012 survey, we see that in 2001 we had 13.4% of young people using cannabis, whereas in 2013 we have 7%. If we look at the prevalence of all drug use, it's dropped from 2001 20% to 2013 11%. You know, that is not the case in Portugal. Unfortunately, a lot of the research is targeted on adults, and there isn't that much good research looking at young people, but the situation of young people in Portugal, unfortunately, isn't so good as Baroness Meacher would suggest. Actually, we've seen a really big increase in young people using cannabis in Portugal. And the issues of young, you know, I've spent a lot of time in California, and if you go into high schools in California or speak to teachers there, far more young people are using cannabis than use cannabis in the UK. You know, we've heard it said that prohibition, as the spin has been put on classification, is responsible for strong strains of cannabis. This is absolutely not true. Stronger strains of cannabis exist because the market has demanded stronger strains of cannabis. We have a huge problem with legal highs, and I can tell you as somebody who sits with young people, when a young person sits in front of me and we're talking about a legal high, they say to me, if this drug was dangerous, surely the government would ban it. You know, okay, I'll sum up very quickly. When I got appointed to the ACMD, I wanted to be on that committee because obviously I'm an addiction professional and I'm in recovery, but I really didn't know what I felt about classification. The thing that swung me was the issue of legal highs. You know, methadone exploded massively, very, very quickly. It was being promoted on social media, even on my Facebook page. It was freely available. It was being imported by the kilogram. When we classified that substance overnight, the price shot up, the websites got taken down. It made a huge difference. You know, Danny talked about being carbon neutral, and the need to control carbon. Well, we've got 300 years left of oil, but we do need to control carbon if we're all to have a future. I would suggest to you that actually the classification system is working. We do need to continue to classify. It's not a perfect system, but it is working. Thank you.